Hello again. So it's Stardate 3/28/2026.2. And I thought I would do two things today. One is I want to tell another story about Al from the last Tales from the Psych Ward. And my dad asked me to talk about an interaction with my previous PCP, primary care physician, the doctor that I left recently. And I'm actually going to tell you about two interactions with her. But so first, Al. Um, After he's been brought in and settled in a little bit, it was early in the day, and he had been sleeping, and he was still asleep, I think, and I was talking to a staff member, a security guard named Mike, not changing his name, even though I like him, and I think he has some facility with people. And he told me about his, fishing spot, and he's never had a license, and he's never been caught, and about, I believe it was Charles Manson that he was assigned to guard at one point and being taunted by him. So Mike and I are talking, and then Al comes up and is just sort of hanging out. And at some point, Mike drops a pen. And Al grabs it off the ground, which is a big mistake. Because it's a weapon. And so before I know what's happening, Mike has Al's arm twisted behind his back. And is trying to get him to drop it, but of course Al doesn't speak English. So I can either attack Mike and go to jail. Pretty sure I was already on my way to jail. Yeah, no, I was at that point. So make my situation worse. Or I can try and talk or try and communicate with Al. So what I do is I walk around behind the both of them so that Al can see me, and I hold up my hand and I do this. And he eventually drops the pen. And Mike lets him go, and he, wanders off, very angry and obviously hurt. But Mike said something to me after, which is why I want to tell this story, which is, I feel bad about that. But, he had a weapon. And then he said, I don't know, we should have been doing what you've been doing, building rapport, which is true. If you don't build rapport, you're going to rely on violence more often. That's just the way it is. So the second story is about Dr. Fredrickson, not changing her name either. And my dad wants me to tell you about what happened recently, but I'm actually going to tell you what happened the first time I interacted with her. I had recently relapsed on alcohol and had managed to stop. I had managed to taper off on my own. And it had been a couple of months since that point, since I'd had a drink when I first saw her, and I was very, very depressed. Very, very depressed. And she kept insisting that I was doing well because, you haven't had a drink. And I work with lots of addicts, and some of them can't even go, a day or a week. And I pulled my mask down and said, I'm sorry. I know this is important, pointing to the mask, but this is important. You're going to kill someone. I must be doing well because I haven't had a drink? Would you use that standard for anyone else? And just as importantly, what does an alcoholic look like right before they relapse? there sober every time. And she was able to, correct. She said, "Oh my God, you're right. And you've been telling me that you're not doing well. I don't." And so she apologized. And from then on, she was very good until a couple years later, when I wound up in another depressive episode, and still ongoing. And I had a check-in with her, and I let slip something like, I just want to go to sleep and not wake up. And so she, really pleaded with me, I would say, to let her speak to IBH, Internal Behavioral Health, at the hospital, where I go to get my medical care. And so I said, fine, whatever. So she leaves. And then a therapist comes in, and she wants to call the third-party psychiatry service that they use. They don't have psychiatry in-house. You have to go somewhere else for it. Usually you do it online. I happen to know that this service won't work with me because I typically won't answer questions about danger to self, which is as a way of protecting myself from the things that I've been talking about in these videos. But I, sure, whatever. And that's exactly what happens. We call, they refuse. She starts to give me a handout of a bunch of stuff that I've seen before, a bunch of numbers that I've called before, and won't be calling again. And I got really mad. And I was like, I don't need that. And she's like, I'm just going to leave it on the chair. And I was like, okay. So at that point, I just left. And it's a good thing that I did. Because unbeknownst to me, the psychiatrist that Dr. Fredrickson has on the phone, that's who she's consulting with at Internal Behavioral Health. And to be clear, this psychiatrist is a third party hired by the hospital, but it's not like a psychiatrist that they've hired. It's an organization. And so every day it's a different psychiatrist. It's just whoever can take it or can work that shift that day. And they're not in the hospital. Anyway, that psychiatrist basically yelled at Dr. Fredrickson, saying that she had a duty and that, you had to intervene here. And Fredrickson at this point knows that I don't want I don't want medical staff involved if I'm suicidal. She knows this. And yeah, the laws and the ethics here are another matter. But she knows what I want. Anyway. So it's a good thing that I leave, because that psychiatrist insists on calling security to have me escorted to the ER. Thankfully, by the time they get there, I'm gone. So I get home and I get a phone call from Dr. Fredrickson, who says, I don't know what to do. And I say, great, call me when you do. And hang up the phone. And then 20 minutes later, the police are at my door. Now, I happen to know my rights, and I was, in a state to act on them. So all I had to say was, do I have any obligation to speak to you? No? Okay, goodbye. But I gotta tell you, it's not a great experience having a bunch of armed men show up at your door to help. But that's what you get. All right. Until next time, folks.